saying, as overlapping roles, when it comes to circumstances, you know, they have to have overlapping roles. The difference in actually the difference between an isolation and a quarantine situation is important. Isolation separates people known to be ill from those who are not who are not sick. Says the CDC quarantine separation, and also restricts movement of people exposed to be contagious to people exposed to be contagious disease but not yet ill, to see if they become sick. You see what I'm saying? To see if they become sick. So there's a space and a fine line between those who are sick and those who are not, or those who may be and not yet sick. And we have to understand that, because that's important when it comes to, understanding that we all don't have to do, that. We have to quarantine according to the CDC, and this, say, the CDC quarantine separation and also restricts the movement of people who people exposed to a contagious disease but not yet ill. You know what I'm saying? If they become sick. If they become sick. You know what I'm saying? In 2014, the Congressional Research Center, the research service, wrote about the quarantine and the federal constitution. You know what I'm saying? And the federal constitution, when there were, concerns about Ebola, years ago. You know what I'm saying? The Ebola virus. You know what I'm saying? They had a little thing going on with that. In general, the research service said the power to take quarantine measures reserves to the state under, under the, it looks like the 10th Amendment, 1824 Supreme Court Justice John Marshall's opinion in the Gibbons and Ogden, Gibbons versus Ogden, due to clear line between the federal government and the state government when it comes to, regulating activities within and between states. Marshall's, reasoning set the precedent, that the police power are reserved to the state for activities within their borders, with some exception. These police powers include the ability to impose isolation quarantine conditions. Marshall wrote that quarantine law from a portion of the portion of that immense mass and legislation which embraced everything within the temporary within the territory of the state, not surrendering to the general government. You know what I'm saying? The research, also found that the service also notes one trend in a common day among the states, in its antiquity, antiquity of the quarantine law within the states between 40 to 100 years old. You know what I'm saying? To be sure, the federal government has important quarantine power under Section 361 of the Public Health Service Act. United Secretary of State, Secretary of Health and Human Services has the power to measure, has the power to take measure, contain communicable diseases from foreign countries into the United States between states. The CDC act on behalf of the Secretary in these matters. And that's a fact. The federal public health and welfare statute also gives federal government the authority to isolate quarantine persons with certain diseases based on the executive order issued by President George W. Bush in 2000. I think it was 2000. I think it was 2003. Yeah, I think it was 2003. In 2003. You know what I'm saying? The federal government also has seldom use of power to impose large-scale quarantine. For example, the federal government issues isolation and quarantine orders during the Spanish influenza pandemic in 1918 and between 1918 and 1919. But the Constitution, under under the Constitution, individual rights in quarantine and isolation conditions under the Fifth and the 14th Amendment, you know what I'm saying? 14th Amendment, rights due process and equal protection, public health regulations used to impose such conditions cannot be arbitrated, oppressive, or unreasonable. And that's the point. You know what I'm saying? And unreasonable. So we have to look at this, based on what we're dealing with under the government and what laws we have. As we see, should not be arbitrary, oppressive, or unreasonable in this matter. You know what I'm saying? There are precedents where courts have rules that the state and local government didn't meet the burden of proof justifying a quarantine. For example, in the 1900s, court ruled against the city of San Francisco when it tried to, correlate, and then, you know what I'm saying, quarantine. I think it was a quarantine over the bubonic plague, against the bubonic plague, when the court had doubt that the plague condition even existed. So we have to look at what we're looking at based on what protects us from the government and ourselves as individuals under the Constitution. That's very important. And there also is a precedent that authority should provide confine people with an explanation. There also precedent that the authority should provide people with an explanation about why they are confined and notify them they have a right to counsel and other constitutional provisions. That's a fact, Jack. You know what I mean? So we have to look at this thing very carefully. A current example of the federal quarantine order relates to COVID-19 virus on the CDC website, outlining of many of these principles for people arriving in the United States and reasonable suspects. You know what I'm saying? Reasonably suspected by the CDC of exposure, reasonably suspected of the CDC saying of exposure to the two or infections with the coronavirus. These quarantines have the right to a medical review and to ask a federal court to review your federal quarantine, including any right, you know what I'm saying, as reviewed, any right to be reviewed, which is habeas reviewed. And that's a fact. So we have to look at these whole things as we go. Also, the federal government have update plans to cope with a national influenza pandemic. First development in 2005. Last update was 2017. The national pandemic influenza plan deal with the isolation quarantine, you know what I'm saying, option is needed. Of course, the final question is how can the government enforce isolation and quarantine conditions? And that's a fact. They can do so under many different forms. You know what I'm saying? That you don't know, but they can. But they have to watch their step as they move forward to make sure that they're not violating the rights of the people or anything to do with that. You know what I'm saying? So we have to stay close on this and watch what's going on based on everything else. So this is Point Black saying, I'm just going to finish up on this because people need to start being more aware of what they're dealing with out here based on even their constitutional rights under these kind of conditions. Because we have to remember, under these conditions, it might be a condition of our lives can be in full jeopardy based on this. So we don't want to put ourselves in bad conditions just because we try to be rebellious. We have a right to the evidence and we have a right to the day in court. You know what I'm saying? And it must not be, arbitrary, oppressive, and none of these things based on this. You know what I mean? So we have to look into many things here. So this is Point Black saying, we have to give thanks and praise to the mother, the S-O-N, not the S-U-N, and her glory of her children that shine the sun, say, Rastafari, and give us life, health, and goodwill on this planet. And we need to respect it and clean it up. Get rid of this Luciferian garbage, and let's move on to a great country that we always was and is. We don't always have to say, make America great. It was always great. The land is even great. It's just the wicked people that come in and try to take over and change everything to be in their favor so they can get all the reaps and the wheels. And they can make choices for you, such as what's going on with Biden and Putin. How many people know this tension is building even with all about 6 or 7 countries raging war? You know what I'm saying? And they're not speaking enough about it, but our lives is at jeopardy because each one of them are dealing with nuclear weapons, and that's got to stop. And that's point facts. So this is Point Black saying, be strong and healthy in thy ways. Do more studying and research that one can get past this mess. So I say, Ra, stay for Ra. And as said he would always say, the mighty general, Sarah Son Seti, no man proceeds his mother. One.